I am a World War II historian and researcher. I have no PhD, no master's, and no bachelor's degree. But for the last 3.5 years, I've spent most of my free time researching about 900 plus individuals from the towns of Reading and North Reading, Massachusetts, that served in the Second World War. I was also born a month after 9/11. I'm drawing your attention to this to draw attention to the distance between myself and the men and women who fought in the Second World War, as well as the distance between myself and the children of those who fought in the Second World War. You see, as many of you know, World War II ends in 1945. So the youngest American veteran of that conflict is 95, probably older, if they're still with us. Their children are in their 60s, 70s, or even their 80s. So when I'm lucky enough to make contact with a relative of a veteran that I'm researching, I'm almost always interacting with someone who's at least 40 years older than me. This has led to some code switching. All of my emails start with Dear Mr. or Dear Miss, followed by a last name until I'm told otherwise. Their veteran, who I've spent at least a few hours researching, often months, becomes Mr. or Miss. I have a propensity to say bruh when I'm frustrated or stressed or anything really. And I do tend to curse sometimes, but I can't do either of those things. Relatives come to me with very varying levels of knowledge about their veteran service. I always default to being the listener. At first, I did a lot of these things out of a sense of fear, I think. I wasn't quite sure how to interact with folks who were so much older than me. And not only was I aware of making myself comfortable, but I also wanted them to feel comfortable talking to me. So I was always a little fearful. Luckily for me, Reading really embraced my project, but even then I was still scared. I was always waiting for what I thought was the inevitable, which was a relative looking me in the eyes and saying, "Who do you think you are? You are a 20-something-year-old woman. You have 2 moms. You were adopted. You spent most of your teenage years in the Facebook trenches of town politics. Why should I tell you anything about my relative who served in World War II? You are nothing like them." To this day, 3.5 years into my project, that has not happened a single time. In fact, I very vividly remember going to meet the son of a veteran who at that time I had been researching for a while. And as I was pulling into the parking lot, my low tire pressure light came on. So we're both getting out of our cars, greeting each other, but I'm an anxious person, so I'm looking over at my tires, and of course he notices this, so he says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh, my low tire pressure light came on." And so this man, who I had spoken with on the phone for maybe 20 minutes, almost exclusively about his father, by proxy about him, but mostly about his dad, proceeded to go around to each of my 4 tires and give them a little tap, as if he were checking on them. And it hit me in that moment that this man cared about me simply because I cared about his dad, and in turn because I cared about him. It's not very often that we get to have interactions like that, where the entire premise of the interaction is, tell me about yourself, and tell me about the people that you come from. But I think that's really strange, because those are some of the most bonding moments that we have in our lives, whether it's sharing a funny story from our past or sharing the intricate details of a trauma. Now, more than ever, people are feeling really lonely, especially older folks. In fact, it's become such a problem that it was demonstrated in a 2020 study done in the United States by the Committee on the Health and Medical Dimensions of Social Isolation and Loneliness in Older Adults. The results were pretty startling. They determined that 1/4 of community-dwelling Americans aged 65 and older are considered to be socially isolated. 43% of adults aged 60 and older regularly reported feeling loneliness. Social isolation was associated with an increased risk of premature mortality from all causes. Social isolation was also associated with a 50% increased risk of developing dementia. And loneliness in heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death, a 68% increased risk of hospitalization, and a 57% increased risk of the dreaded emergency department visit. So it's pretty clear that for older adults, being and or feeling alone can quite literally kill you. I'm suggesting that intergenerational connections, where we bring together old and young, can serve as a powerful antidote to this problem. I'm sure most of you can name some of the many benefits that young folks get from having older adults in their lives. If you're blanking, think of your parents. Your own parents have a very, very big impact on the person you become. For me personally, through my project, all of the older adults that I've kind of added to my social circle have made me feel more confident in the stability of my social circle. It's also made me feel like I have this wealth of life experiences that I can draw upon if I feel I need to. And also, I just get more of those little interactions that cheer us up by virtue of having more people with a little bit more time to give to me. So clearly, for young folks, intergenerational connection is very, very special and very important. It is for older folks as well. Harvard psychiatrist George Vaillant led a study over the course of 30 years. This study was examining the way that quality of life changes as we get older. And in the 3 decades that this man worked on this study, he made an observation that older adults who reported having actively contributed to the growth, development, and nurturing of youth in their lives were 3 times as likely to report that they were actually happy in comparison to their peers who did not do those things. Just think about that. 3 times as likely to, in their old age, be happy, content. Clearly, these are very powerful tools for older folks as well. However, there's a catch, because there's always a catch. There's a barrier to this connection. America is becoming more and more age segregated. This did not used to be a problem in America. In fact, it used to be one of the things that made America unique, that people interacted regardless of their age brackets. That's not the case anymore. In fact, I'm sure it won't surprise many of you to know that research has suggested that about 1/3 of Americans aged 55 and older live in communities composed almost exclusively by other people aged 55 and older. So how do we bring together people who have spent so much time and effort trying to get away from each other? Well, I want to bring us back to where we started. I started making so many connections with folks that were older than me through my research of their parents. I ended up making connections with these folks because I asked them questions about themselves and I asked them questions about their families. And I found this was a surprisingly easy way to get people to open up to me, because everyone loves to talk about themselves. And not only was it a surprisingly easy way to get them to open up to me, but they felt comfortable talking to me, and perhaps most importantly, it gave them a reason to talk to me. Because very rarely do we interact with people who are much older or much younger than us if they're not in our family. So we can basically invite older folks back into the same communities that many of them helped to mold in their own youth by asking them to share some of their life experiences, things that they didn't know when they were young and building that community that they know now, that might help the young people that are building the community. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go up to the older lady who lives in your apartment complex and ask her what her parents did during the war. Don't do that. But I am suggesting that if you find yourself on a long flight, or you find yourself even in a long grocery line, or you just find yourself in the same place at the same time with another person, maybe they're older, maybe they're younger, maybe they're not, I just want you to consider asking your fellow interlocutor about themselves and caring about their answer. Thank you.